And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, in Washington, D.C., Desmond Lachman, scholar with the American Enterprise Institute. In New Haven, Connecticut, Stathis Kalyvas, professor of political science at Yale University. And here in studio, Sakis Gekas, professor of modern Greek history at York University. Theodore Tolias of the Schulich School of Business, also at York. And Eric Margolis, columnist with the Toronto Sun and author of American Raj. It's good to have everybody both here in the studio. Eric, lovely to see you again. To our friends on the line from Points Beyond, thank you for joining us south of the border as well. Eric, there are a lot of people who sort of have a basic understanding of what Greece is in right now, but for those who haven't followed it all that carefully, give us a sense of the trouble that this country finds itself in right now.
Well, it's huge trouble, but it's not unique trouble. A lot of other countries share the same problem. Greece's new socialist government, which came into power last year, did something unprecedented. It opened the books and it told the public the truth. And it said what's happened is that the whole string of previous Greek governments had been lying about the financial condition of Greece. When Greece joined the European Union monetary, the euro, Greece claimed its deficit was 3.7%. In fact, as the new government said, it was 12.7%, and the cupboard was bare in Athens. There was no money, and Greece had found itself in a position where it was on the hook for these very belligerent public service unions who were demanding the moon and demanding retirement at 60. And
we'll get into some of that aspect of it, but tell us, they've obviously been looking to their European friends for help bailing themselves out. They've reached an agreement of sorts for now.
Yes, Greece has billions of dollars of loans coming due this month, next month, and there was a panic that they weren't going to pay, and Greece was going to default on the loans, setting off a firestorm across the EU. Just today, the European Union has come in reluctantly and said that they would stand behind Greece's problems. They would help finance the Greek issue. They would lend Greece money at preferential rates, not at the high rates that the open market is doing. But the problem is that this is a Band-Aid. It's helping Greece's current liquidity crisis, but it's not solving the underlying economic crisis.
Well, to that end, we've got some numbers here that reflect what you just said. If we can bring those up right now. Here is the situation as you compare Greece with Ireland, which is another one of the countries we hear is in big trouble as well. The fiscal deficit in Ireland is 12.4% of GDP. In Greece, it's 12.7%. The sovereign debt in Ireland, 65.8%. In Greece, almost double, 112.6% of GDP. And the markets, the insurance market suggests that it is riskier to invest in Greek government bonds rather than Irish government bonds. You see the number on the right there is almost 3 times higher than the Irish number. So, Desmond Lachman, let me bring you in at this point. Both these countries are facing serious austerity measures to get their books restructured. The markets seem to have much more confidence in Ireland than they do in Greece. How come?
Well, the Irish have recognized that they've got a big problem. They've taken budget measures to try to address the problem. So at least for now, markets have got confidence that Ireland is addressing its problem. It remains to be seen how long that confidence is sustained. I think that the problem with both Greece and Ireland is they've run up these huge budget deficits. They've lost around about 30% in international competitiveness, and they stuck in a fixed exchange rate system. They don't have a currency of their own that can be devalued to regain competitiveness, to spur exports. So they really are in a very difficult situation. And I'd very much agree with the earlier speaker who regards this bailout package as merely a Band-Aid that doesn't really address the solvency issue that Greece has, that it's going to be very difficult for Greece to bring its public finances back into order that will allow it to borrow in the market. Greece really needs a debt restructuring. It also needs an exchange rate depreciation.
All right, we'll follow up on these things as we go along in the program. Stathis, tell me this. Do you think this is double standard at work here? Ireland seems to have much more, or the markets rather, seem to have much more confidence in the Irish than they do in the Greeks. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because the underlying competitiveness of the Irish economy is much sounder than in Greece. Greece has experienced a situation of overspending and waste for a number of years. hasn't really addressed problems of underlying competitiveness. And the only way out of the crisis in a situation of international crisis on the one hand and impossibility of devaluing on the other hand is really extremely difficult, because you really have to, in a sense, rebuild your economy. The one advantage that Greece has that tends to be overlooked is precisely because the waste in the public sector in Greece has been so enormous and in many respects so mismanaged that there is a tremendous amount of correction that can be achieved if the government decides that it wants to do that.
Stathis, let me get your view on this, because we hear about the so-called pigs. It's not a nice way to put it, but we hear pigs, not necessarily a comment, but an acronym. Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain. But most of the focus, all of them in financial difficulty right now, but most of the focus on Greece. Why do you think?
I think this is the beginning of a cycle, a downward, unfortunately, cycle that involves all the 4 countries you mentioned. It is not accidental that Greece was picked up by financial markets to target it, because target especially, but I think the similarities are rather overstretched. I think, as Stathis Kalyvas mentioned, there is a serious difference in competitiveness. There is a serious difference in the type of economies these countries have, and other cultural factors as well. But I think it is important that we bring other countries, as well as the European Union and the Commission, in the discussion.
Well, look at Theodore, I'll read these numbers off and then get you to comment on this, because if you look at how Greece is doing relative to other countries in the world, not badly at all. In the Human Development Index, Greece ranks 25th in the world. This according to the UNDP, World Bank, OECD. The GDP, 27th in the world. Subjective well-being, as measured by the OECD, 18th in the world. This is a relatively rich country by international standards. How do they find themselves in such a nasty predicament?
Well, that's a good question. I would argue that for a number of years there was emphasis not so much on investment but rather on consumption. In Greece, the average household would actually not hesitate often to borrow for 2 or 3 weeks vacation. And so there was an emphasis on consumption, not only by the average household, but also in the public sector. And as you know, when the emphasis is on consumption rather than investment, that is not sustainable down the road. And I think that was, a reason that shows Greece to have a relatively high, or had a relatively high standard of living, but at the same time, a standard of living that now we all know is coming down crashing.
Eric, can you weigh in on this? How can a country that seems to be so relatively well off be in such dire predicaments right now?
Well, like the United States, the Greeks have been living on debts, on borrowing money and living high on the hog. It's been an orgy of debt spending in many countries. Look, there's another issue. I read some reports that up to 40, maybe even over 40% of Greeks don't declare income of more than 12,000 odd euros a year, which means that they don't pay taxes. And Greek businesses are past masters, as I've seen, at evading taxes. So the government has a lousy tax base. Greece, this crisis is like what the U.S. is facing in its states, that the states are going bankrupt. They've been living high on the hog, and Greece and the other, Spain and Ireland and Portugal are sure to come next. But the problem is that there's been massive fraud too in finance. And then we find out that these lovable, warm-hearted people from Goldman Sachs were in there fiddling the books and teaching the Greeks, who were brilliant businessmen, but still teaching the Greeks how to cook their books, so that a lot of the debts were put off into currency exchange vehicles. It's very shaky. But Greece is doing the right thing, because its current government, even though they're socialists, is facing facts. It says we've got to really cut spending like crazy. But last 2 times I've been in Athens, there have been riots in the streets, and more riots are coming. And it's very hard. These public sector unions are the Al-Qaeda of the economic world. They're dangerous.
Just want to confirm, the riots in the streets are not related to your visiting the country, are they?
No, they usually are, but this
Not
time,
this time.
they didn't know I was
Okay,
coming.
just checking. Okay, Theo, you wanted to say.
Yeah, just I wanted to say that when we compare Greece with the United States, there is a significant difference for the Greeks. The availability of credit for consumption, including credit to buy a house, is not something that has been around for a very long period of time. It is a relatively new phenomenon. So most people, a couple of decades ago, for instance, would pretty much have to have most of the money to buy a house. So they were not used to living on credit, or credit cards for that matter. So once that became an option through financial innovation within the banking sector in Greece, because banks were pushing these products, obviously, because they are profitable for them. Sure. Greeks found it an easy and very attractive option and took advantage of it without, though, having the culture of having this self-restraint, which would then protect them down the road when things get sour.
Like the Americans.
Right. Well, Sakis, the neighbors are not...
Sure, go ahead. To that. I mean, it's also important to think that the comparisons between Greece and other European countries, or between even the United States and the European Union, are fairly limited, because I've been reading here, for example, that it's like Washington bailing out California, for instance. Well, it's not like that in the European Union and the Eurozone, precisely because it is an ongoing experiment. In fact, Greece is the first country that is putting these challenges to the European Commission and the Eurozone. And it is actually, it still remains to be seen how they're going to tackle this.
Could you just make the distinction? We have a map up right now making the distinction between the European Union and the Eurozone. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that the European Union consists of 27 members. The latest, Bulgaria and Romania, joined in 2007. The Eurozone consists of 16 countries. It doesn't include the United Kingdom, doesn't include Sweden, for example, Denmark and other countries. And we have to remember that the European Union faced a massive expansion in the last 4 to 5 years. I mean, 10 countries in 2005. What it is lacking is what they call a deep integration. Integration further towards economic and also political integration. Let me go to Desmond for a second, because, Desmond, I don't have to tell you, some of the neighbors are not happy. Relations right now between Greece and Germany in particular are very tense. How come?
Well, Germans don't see why they should be bailing out a country that's profligate. You know, the good German citizens have been saving, that they've had government finances in good shape, and here they're being asked to bail out a country where people retire at 53 as opposed to in Germany where they retire at 65. This strong reluctance to bail out Greece doesn't bode well when the next country comes for assistance from the Germans. We're really not going to be getting Germans offering money to Spain, Portugal and Ireland when their turn comes, because they too have allowed their public finances to slip way beyond the Maastricht criteria. Maastricht required that these countries maintain their budget deficits at 3% of GDP, and here what we're looking at is we're looking at countries where budget deficits are 12% of GDP, debt ratios are over 100% of GDP. This really is something that the Germans can't abide, and this is the reason that you're getting discussion in Germany as maybe we should be devising rules to get countries that don't behave thrown out of this Eurozone experiment.
More on that in a bit. That is the today explanation. Sakis, I wonder if you could follow up by talking to us about some of the historical reasons why Greece and Germany are not getting along so well these days.
I think there are not really founded historical reasons. I mean, some people try to project it in Germany as the nation that has been in decadence since Parthenon in the classical times. In Greece, on the other hand, even from members of government, it was said that, well, actually Germany hasn't paid its the compensation for the Second World War and the destruction that was caused during the Nazi occupation.
Can we show these pictures? Hang on. Michael, have we got these queued up? Here's Focus magazine. If you don't think there are tensions between Germany and Greece right now, take a look at, there's the Venus de Milo, who is saying we're #1 or something like that. And flip it over. Now, this is getting pretty serious when you start brandishing the swastika, is it not?
Yes, it is. It is. But as the Greek Prime Minister said to his credit when he was abroad, we should not consider that corruption is in the Greek DNA, similar to just like we shouldn't consider that National Socialism is in the German DNA. I think it's kind of a populist approach to relations between countries, as was evident in Focus magazine or other or Greek media. It doesn't really help. It doesn't reflect really the seriousness of the situation or even the relations on the ground. I mean, there have been hundreds of thousands of Greeks who been to Germany, who worked as immigrants, and there are also hundreds of thousands of Germans who visit Greece.
Okay, let me get Stathis on this. Stathis, Kalyvas, what's your view on the nature of the tensions right now between Greece and many of its neighbors, but in particular with the Germans?
I think I agree completely with Stathis. They're superficial. I think we shouldn't necessarily take into serious consideration tabloids and the reactions they provoke. I think that fundamentally one has to focus on the macroeconomic issues without emotions. And I think that the recent agreement that was achieved in Brussels by the Eurogroup yesterday precisely reflects the necessity to thinking rationally rather than emotionally about these types of issues.
Okay, let me read something from Focus magazine, the cover of which we just showed, and it goes like this. In the opinion of many Greeks, the state is primarily responsible for ensuring secure public jobs with good salaries. However, the idea of regularly paying taxes strikes people as odd. Eric, you just referred to this. A doctor who lives in Kolonaki, a wealthy neighborhood in Athens, declared in a 2008 a monthly income of only 300 euros. Dozens of his colleagues claim to have earned merely 1,000 euros per month. In order to become good Europeans, as the European Union understands this term, the Greeks would have to change fundamentally. As it stands, the Greeks have organized their lives around moonlighting, tax evasion, and fakilaki. The strange-sounding word connotes all manner of shady business. An envelope filled with cash will make things possible faster. House construction permit, an X-ray appointment, not much happens without cash. International organizations estimate that the Greeks, both individuals and businesses, pay 3.5 billion euros a year in bribes. In Greece, bribery, corruption, and tax evasion are part and parcel of the social bloodstream. Is that a bit harsh, Eric?
Unfortunately not. You know, I love the Greeks, but this is the nature of life in Greece, and not only in Greece, in the whole Balkans, let me add. You know, I wrote in one of my columns, somebody remarked to me once, they said, you know, the Irish and the Greeks and the Albanians and the ex-Yugoslavs are a mess in their own countries. They've got lousy, corrupt governments. They can't agree on anything. All they do is tribal political warfare. But when they get out of this rotten environment and move to North America, for example, they flourish. They glow. They're wonderful businessmen. They're brilliant workers. But it is a major social problem. And you know what? One other side of this currency problem is that when Germans went into the euro, there was enormous reluctance in Germany to give up the Deutschmark. And the Germans were saying back in those days, oh, the Greeks, old Zorba the Greek. You know, we're going to pay for Zorba's drunken debauchery, and they're going to corrupt the Deutschmark. And now this is exactly what's happening. And Angela Merkel, German chancellor, has said, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be asking my people not to retire until they're 67.
Well, let me put those numbers up there.
And the Greeks are up there below 60.
Retirement age 67 in Germany, 61 in Greece. The pensions are not as generous in Germany as they are in Greece. The vacation time is not as big. Theo, why, if you're a German taxpayer, why wouldn't you be angry when you see all this?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. However, we need to actually try, in order to go deeper in this discussion, I think we need to open it up a bit more. We need to reframe it, and we need to try to avoid stereotypes. As Eric said very correctly, when Greeks and others in the Balkans migrate, for instance, Greeks coming to Toronto or Canada, they thrive. That should help us conclude, or at least infer, at least tentatively, that there is nothing inherent in the Greek psyche that makes them lazy, evading taxes.
No. I don't think anybody's saying that. No, he didn't say that. I don't think anybody's saying that.
Yeah, but one could easily make an implication out of it.
I think the sense is that the system that they're operating in is so corrupted.
People respond to incentives.
Yeah.
People respond to incentives. And incentives are set out by policy. So I think that should be the focus. At the same time, we need to understand that Greece has been living under the institutions of democracy not for a very long period of time. And democracy is a very difficult game to play.
I thought you invented it.
Right, but
So you've been at it for 2,000 years.
Right.
Except for a few military coups along the way.
A few military coups, you know, a civil war. A civil war, an occupation, right, during the Second World War.
I'm being facetious, of course we understand.
And a number of other things, right. So I think we need to, speaking of reframing the problem, I think that we need to understand this not just as a Greek problem, but as a European Union problem. If Europe wants to move ahead, and this is a very interesting and exciting experiment, I think Europeans need to realize that having one monetary policy without having a closer fiscal arrangements, it may not be sustainable.
Okay, let me go to
that's a very important thing.
Sure. Let me go to Stathis on this. This is the current economic mess that Greece finds itself in is not the first time in its history that Greece has found itself in some difficult times. Ken Rogoff from Harvard's got a new book out called This Time is Different, and he points to 4 years, 1826, 1843, 1860, and 1932, as other times when Greece actually defaulted. Why does Greece seem to have such ongoing troubles with its finances?
Well, I would say that these troubles are more recent. The dates that you just mentioned are related to the Greek War of Independence, to situations of extreme tension. I would say that the current problems that Greece is experiencing can be traced back into the 1980s, when you had an opening of the political system to include people who in the past had been more or less excluded. At the same time, Greece entered in the European Union, and as a result had a lot of access to easy cash. And so the combination of extending democratic rights, extending participation on the one hand, and having easy money, access to a lot of money coming from the European Union, very often without any implication, that is, the money could be spent without any accounting be given. The only accountability was to voters, created a situation that was just described as one in which a culture of entitlement emerged, in which people do not expect to fund the state, but at the same time expect to be employed, expect to be taken care in every aspect of their life by the state. And this is an unsustainable situation, which is not the result of any cultural predicament. It's precisely a situation of the work of institutions and the incentives. It's a pity that, unfortunately, the opportunity that the European Union was not in that precise aspect exploited as it should have. It's a bit like the situation that Spain faced when it discovered Latin American gold. Suddenly the easy access to money created disincentives and created a society that was not interested in thinking about the future and privileged consumption over investment. But exactly because of that, I believe that the current crisis is a unique opportunity for Greece, very much like in Europe, and has a silver lining in that it's going to force both the political class and the population and the society at large to understand that this system is not sustainable and to correct its institutions. I think that's the great opportunity that Greece is facing right now.
You started your answer by talking about the 1980s, and Desmond, I'm going to read a quote that refers to this time, and then perhaps get you to comment on it if you would. The late Andreas Papandreou's strategy in the 1980s was to give the disenfranchised, who formed the bulk of PASOK voters, that's his party, a shot at living like the middle class. If this meant throwing European assistance and subsidies around like political favors and giving pensions to people who had never contributed to Social Security, such as farmers, then so be it. At last, all those who had been shut out by the right-wing establishment, which triumphed in the Civil War in 1946 to 49, and which was thoroughly discredited by the dictatorship of 1967 to 74, would get to share in the wealth of the nation. The fact that this new middle class was founded on wealth that the country was not producing meant that the economy broke free from all logic and went into its own orbit. Could you say, Desmond, that given that description of things, some good did come out of, call it what you want, the patronage system, the, corruption in lowercase letters, that kind of thing? Was there some good that came out of it?
Well, certainly there's good that comes out, when you're having a party, when you're having excesses of the sort, the economy booms, people benefit from it. The real question, though, is what is the price that is going to now have to be paid for those kind of excesses? And I'm afraid that when Greece has to now bring down its budget deficit from the 13% of GDP to the 3% that is required by the European Union, we're talking about a 10% of GDP contraction in the public sector, which is bound to lead to a very deep recession like we're seeing in Latvia, like we're seeing in Ireland, countries that have tried to correct budget deficits in a fixed currency system. So while you might have had benefits during the period where the government was engaging in largesse, we're now going to have to be paying, or should I say the Greeks are going to now have to be paying a very serious price for that excessive spending. And what we're going to be seeing is many years of deep recession, very high unemployment that is bound to provoke social tensions in Greece, and it yet remains to be seen whether they can stick this course.
And Stathis, with compensation and help, strings come attached, obviously. Are the Greeks prepared for the loss of sovereignty that will come from this?
They certainly do come attached, and if you want a more longer-term historical view on this, there has been another bankruptcy that Ken Rogoff forgot to mention in 1893, which led to an international economic control of, for several years, actually for 7 to 8 years, until 1905. And there are today's strings that come attached to it are the IMF rules and regulations on how to continue funding Greece. I mean, it's called a bailout, it's called a subsidy, and it is certainly would not come without any strings attached, which means it still remains to be seen for the details to work out of what exactly it will involve. The Greek government has said, and it's been accepted, that it has taken, for this year at least, all the measures necessary to comply with the IMF style of loans. The thing is, however, that it will have to be rethought. The whole European Union strategy on this will have to be rethought. I mean, it has taken, in a very EU-like way, so long to give a credible answer that will placate, at least for some time, financial markets, bond speculators practically. That
Let me just, I want to go to Desmond again for a quick follow-up here, because you used to work for the International Monetary Fund, and I'm just wondering if you could take us inside that organization for a moment and give us some idea about how irritated they may be at having to deal yet again with a Greek financial mess.
Well, I think that the main frustration in the IMF is going to be the fact that Greece can't devalue its currency to provide an offset to the enormous fiscal contraction that is going to be required. So basically, the IMF is forced to accept the euro as being Greece's currency, which means that the kind of conditions that they're going to be imposing on Greece is going to be leading to very deep recession, very high unemployment, and it's going to lead to great unpopularity of the IMF in dictating those kind of conditions. This is very much what we're seeing right now with the IMF program in Latvia, where the output of that country has dropped the last 2 years by 20%, where we've got unemployment at 25%, and that is bound to provoke deep dislike of the IMF, like we saw, during the Asian crisis in the 1990s.
Understood. Eric, a follow?
Steve, in my view, the main role of the IMF is to come into countries. It's a vehicle for the local politicians to hide behind and saying, well, we can't give you any more money, but it's the wicked IMF that's forcing us, not ourselves.
Because that's a constructive thing, then.
Yeah, well, in a sense, yes, as long as it works. But the IMF does not have a terrific record of rescuing countries. In fact, what they've squeezed the hell out of a lot of countries and caused great suffering and social unrest in the countries. Now, in North Europe, they resent countries that have sunshine and that are enjoying good weather and sunshine, but they're profligate. It's like the ant and the grasshopper of De La Fontaine's wonderful fable. And they don't want to give these countries money. And I don't see how Greece can cut its spending now, because what all left-wing governments do is they expand their social spending to bring in more and more voters, and then everybody votes for them, like giving everybody government jobs. Of course they're going to vote for the government in power. I don't see how Greece can cut its spending. I don't think any Greek government is going to have, short of a dictatorship, will have the ability to cut spending down to what it should be. So I think this crisis is going to muddle on. In the last 19th century, the creditor powers would have sent in cruisers and battleships to shell Athens, or Piraeus at least, until the Greeks paid up their money. They're not going to do it this time. So I think they're going to end up papering over this crisis, and it's going to fester, and it's going to keep festering as the next crisis goes and hits Spain and Portugal. Dangerous situation.
Theo, what about the loss of sovereignty? How are the Greeks going to handle that as exterior organizations like the IMF come in and sort of play sheriff, if you like?
Yeah. Well, I think the Greeks are fully cognizant at this point that they are going to pay a price, a very significant price. I think a number of observers have been surprised to see how the Greeks have taken the austerity measures. We haven't seen as much of protest as many people were expecting on the streets. So that's number one. Number two, and this is significant to me, Europe is very likely to pay a significant price as well, unless they consider Greece as effectively becoming a catalyst for very significant institutional changes at the level of the Eurozone, especially having to do with fiscal policy.
What do you mean Europe's going to pay a price? What kind of a price?
Well, the price that I think Europe is likely to pay is the price of instability, weakness of the euro, and such. One of the primary objectives, just to keep things in perspective, regarding the establishment of this European experiment, if you wish, following the Second World War, was regional stability and security, making sure that no other major disaster takes place, number one. And number two, it was also part of a design in the context of the Cold War. So stability and security have been the strategic drivers of the European experiment. So the question here in the price might be political, and it might come out in the form of even regional friction and instability down the road, and most significantly and most immediately, weakness of the euro, which would then become an issue for Germany and France at least.
Okay, Stathis, do you see this as well?
Yes, to follow up from what Theo is saying, I mean, the Greek people, like any other country that has joined the European Union and the Eurozone specifically, acknowledge that there is a loss of sovereignty when it comes to fiscal policy, at least. I mean, the challenge and the loss of sovereignty has been also from, not just from the institution itself, the European Union, but from bond speculators that have been targeting not just the Greek economy as a weakest link, but the Eurozone as a whole. I mean, this is what I think this last weekend Greek and other European Union finance ministers acknowledged, and they came yesterday with a rescue plan of 30 billion euros in order to placate markets for a while at least. And in fact, spreads have gone down today.
Stathis, I'm going to read something, and Eric brought up a moment ago this issue of everybody loves the government when the government gives everybody a job. Let me read this and then get you to comment on it. The vast majority of Greek civil servants and others working in public enterprises are guaranteed lifetime employment. This practice arose from the country's recent past, when any new government coming to power would fire the employees hired by its predecessor and replace them with its own supporters. Unfortunately, immunity from dismissal has been abused and simply offers hundreds of thousands of employees shelter from changing economic conditions. The fact that these employees cannot be fired, except for extremely serious reasons, has contributed to the decline of productivity in the public sector. Stathis, do you think Greece can reform its public sector?
I think it will have to. And as I said before, it is difficult to understate the extent of waste that you observe in the public sector, not just in terms of employment, but in terms of general waste of various public sector companies operating at tremendous losses without producing anything. So in that respect, the amount of fat existing that can be cut is quite enormous. It's going to cost some pain, but a lot of it is going to be achieved, I think, because there's no other choice. And I think one of the good aspects of having both the European Union and the IMF looking over at the pace of reforms is to create the right incentive for the government to go and take these kinds of measures that are absolutely necessary right now. We can imagine various trajectories and various future scenarios, from a general doomsday scenario in which Greece is just the first domino to fall, causing general instability, crisis. The second bad scenario would be a situation in Greece in which Greece is kind of isolated and it has to basically pay the cost eventually with a longer or shorter move out of the Eurozone so that it can devalue. And then there is a third scenario in which the economic situation globally changes and allows these kinds of reforms to take place in a better economic environment, which eventually can cause those reforms to succeed and the country to move to a better situation. There are other advantages as well that Greece has by being a member of the European Union, which is, for example, that the situation of unemployment can be mitigated by the opportunity and the possibility that Greeks have to be able to work in other countries of the European Union. There are a number of good aspects that derive from the fact that Greece is a member of the European Union rather than being alone, such as, say, Argentina in 2001, that I think give at least some measure of hope for a better outcome in this kind of dire situation right now.
Okay, Eric Margolis wants to follow.
This crisis is pointing out to a big gap in the European Union, and that is it has no enforcement mechanism for its fiscal policies amongst the members. If you have truants and delinquents, what can you do about them? You can't take them out to the woodshed. You can only kick them out. That's very dire. It's like cutting off a diseased finger or something like that. The EU has been on this expansionist role, and the monetary union too, and would set a very bad sign. Now, I know a lot of Northern Europeans want to kick the Greeks out, but wait a minute, what about the Italians? What about the Portuguese? What about the Irish? You know, soon you may end up with the French and the Germans together. So the EU is going to have to develop some kind of financial control, like a Federal Reserve or something like that, to exert punitive powers on this country. And as far as the loss of sovereignty for Greeks, well, I hate to say it, but the Greeks would do well to lose some sovereignty in their finances, for sure, and have the Germans running them rather than the local boys.
Oh boy, that's not provocative at all to say, is it?
And well, I wouldn't. Would you put money in Greek banks right now? I wouldn't. I would still put them in the German banks, not. So it's unfortunately it's true, and the Germans are the financial czars of Europe.
Desmond, I read a couple of your pieces in which you suggest, I guess, the trip to the woodshed is the way Eric put it, but I think you said something stronger than that, which is maybe it's time to show Greece the exit door for the European Union. Why do you think?
Well, I think that it might be in Greece's own interest not to go along with an IMF program that imposes real austerity, many years of deep recession, only to find that they, in the end, have to restructure their debt and adopt their own currency. I think that it would make a lot more sense for Greece to recognize that their public finances are in such bad shape that a debt restructuring is inevitable, and to get that debt restructuring over so that they can start with a clean deck and move ahead. I think that this is not convenient for the rest of Europe because what that would mean is huge hits to the European banks. But I don't think that Greece should be put through the ringer for the sake of the German banks. It would be in Greece's own interest to recognize that they, in the end, going to have to reschedule their debt. They're going to have to devalue a currency, and it just, to me, doesn't make sense for them to try to tighten their belt to the tune needed and find that their output drops by 15–20% in the process, only to then find that they've got to reschedule the debt.
There was another option, too, suggested by some nasty German publications, and that was that the Greeks could start selling their islands to the North Europeans, and that way they could raise the cash that they owe.
Well, Theo, what do you think of Eric's idea of allowing Germany to run Greece's banks as a means of improving the financial situation?
Well, I don't think this is, even it's not.
I think he's kidding, but I'm not sure.
I think the Germans should have run America's banks too, or the Canadians.
I think to be honest, I think that the discussion should also focus on the other side of this equation, which is the shortcomings, institutional policy shortcomings of the European Union here. This has been an ongoing experiment on uncharted territory, the EU experiment I'm talking about. And if some of us, I'm sure, have long enough memory to remember that after the European currency crisis, following shortly after German unification in Europe in the early 90s, there was a big problem of the European exchange rate mechanism. The British pound got ejected, the Spanish peseta got ejected, the Italian lira got ejected, and that put the whole exchange rate mechanism in Europe in turmoil for some time. Eventually that, though, propelled Europe to get to the euro much faster than they would have done otherwise.
Yes.
So I would like to frame this discussion as follows. With Greece being shown now, and for a good reason, the weak link of Europe, I think this is an opportunity not only for Greece to reform some of its practices in terms of fiscal policy and other things, but also for the European Union to realize that this is a unique opportunity that should propel it to a closer union. And that, by definition, comes with giving up some sovereignty. The Eurozone countries have chosen consciously to give up sovereignty when it comes to monetary policy. Why not give up some more sovereignty in the name of togetherness? That's my point.
Let me follow up with Stathis on this. How much, you tell me how much, I have heard that this attitude is present in Greece, and you tell me how much so.
Which attitude?
I'm about to describe it. We created democracy, damn it. The rest of the world owes us for creating the most wonderful system around for people to live their lives in. And if it means that, you know what, you got to put a little water in your wine at this time in your histories, do it. You owe us.
No, I don't think this is a very widespread view. It's rather marginal in Greece. I mean, the majority of people have realized, it's, especially because of the current economic crisis and the dimension it has acquired throughout the world. I mean, we're talking about Greece being in world news front page nearly every day for the last 4 to 5 months. I mean, this is not ordinary. So the majority of people, overwhelming I would say, realize that this is not something that the rest of the world owes Greece. I mean, they realize, yes, there are fiscal problems, enormous. There is corruption, for which Greek people are responsible as well, of course. But at the same time, the majority of Greeks are not the highest civil servants in Europe. They do not get the highest pensions in Europe. This is an exaggeration. I mean, a few thousand people may do get high pensions, but not the overwhelming majority of people. And also, it is, as Theo was saying, a lack of policy from the point of view of the European Union. I mean, we're talking about Greece leaving Eurozone or not. I mean, it is not as simple as taking your money from one bank and going to another.
And I want to follow up with Stathis on this. The Papandreou government, do you have confidence in their ability to resolve this?
Well, the party is internally divided. It's a party that has its roots in populist practices of the 1980s that created the problem in the first place. But at the same time, it's a party which also contains a lot of very progressive modern elements, including the Prime Minister. I think they've realized the depth of the problem. And I think that they also realized that the problem is also an opportunity for them to introduce reforms that everyone had recognized. And I want to stress that point. People in the last 10 years have recognized the need to introduce those reforms, but there was always a fear from the perspective of the government that well-entrenched special interests, especially public unions, sector unions and others, would actually block them. Now there is an opportunity to actually carry these kinds of programs. And I would also emphasize and stress the fact that even though a lot of people benefited from this kind of situation, at the same time, a lot of Greeks are not happy in having to bribe their way into the healthcare system and having to live with this kind of petty corruption on a daily basis. So there is, if well handled, there is an opportunity to generate a lot of public support for this kind of situation. It's going to take a lot of good will and a good faith and a good economic environment, because the recession that is coming is obviously going to cause a lot of pain. But at the same time, it's, I think, important to emphasize the other aspect, which has not been given a lot of press, precisely because there is always a tendency to look at the darker side of the coin. I'm not questioning that there is a dark side, But I also want to emphasize that there is also a good opportunity as well.
I understand, but Eric, when you take your next trip to Greece and people protest in the streets again because of it, and also because of these other austerity measures that will be forthcoming, can any Greek government survive what will no doubt be ferocious protests in the streets to protest the measures that are coming?
And from its own supporters, too. I think it's going to be very difficult. Greece is also, this has not been brought up, Greece is also going to have to make massive cuts in its defense budget, which is very high per capita, one of the highest in NATO. And they're burying the hatchet to an extent with the Turks, which is very good. But still, you'll have to cut here. And the problem is that, you know, Greece, we're focusing on Greece. Greece is a small country with a small economy. This is the next wave of crisis produced by the financial debauch on Wall Street that started from gambling and living on credit. It should really be called the American crisis, or the American-British crisis. And Greece is now paying the price for having become addicted to Vegas-style living. But as I said, the other European countries are facing the crisis, and Great Britain may be the next big shoe to drop, too, because its finances are just as bad, if not worse than Greece. It has a bigger economy, so it can absorb more punishment. So, again, it's very important for us to rescue Greece from its own profligacy, but we have to do it in a way, or Europe has to do it in a way that it can't be seen that it's rewarding profligate behavior or encouraging other countries to spend, like the American banks who gambled like drunken sailors and then said, oh, don't worry, Uncle Sam will bail us out, and he did.
Let me get Desmond on that. That is, Eric has nicely defined the fine line that the government, that the country has to walk along right now. How do you see it resolving these issues, and do you see them resolving it relatively peacefully?
I just don't think that this can be resolved easily, because going the route of fiscal austerity when you can't cheapen your currency to increase exports as a cushion is going to mean a very deep recession. So I don't think that there's any easy way out of this. It's a question as to whether you can stick the course. You can solve these problems if you prepare to put up with a drop in output of 20%, with unemployment at very high levels for a prolonged period of time. But I would just think that the protests that we're seeing in Greece before the austerity has even begun doesn't give one much confidence that Greece is going to be able to stick the path. If they don't stick the path, the money is going to be cut off. That's the whole idea of conditional lending.
Theo, can this government withstand millions of people in the streets protesting their actions?
Interestingly, I don't think that this is going to be a likely outcome. I think that when labor unions are weak, when unemployment is rising, when people are uncertain about their employment prospects, then the bargaining power of those unions is actually diminishing. And I think that this explains very well why, over a few weeks now, after the introduction of a succession of austerity measures, the streets have been relatively quiet, and whatever demonstrations we've seen were relatively very orderly and not of the type that we have seen in the past.
Stathis, what do you say on that?
Well, I think Theo is right. I mean, there has been an expectation because of the December 2008 riots in Athens that this is going to break out as kind of daily riots and go extremely wild. But it hasn't happened so far. I don't know whether it will happen. It's very difficult to tell at the moment. We certainly shouldn't give the impression that Athens and Greece overall is a kind of lawless country where people demonstrate, in riots every day. It certainly has to go to Theo's point about the trade unions. There is an issue about the lack of credibility that not just trade unions, but the political system as a whole has in Greece. And it's timely, the help that came from the European Union, because Greeks started seeing even Europe as in a kind of more skeptical light, which is not very hopeful.
Stathis, we're down to our last minute here. Let me get you on that same thing. Do you think it's possible for this country to turn itself around without millions of people going into the streets? And we know when protests are held in Greece, at least in the recent past, someone usually dies. Can they avoid the bloodshed this time and turn things around?
Well, I think it's possible. I think it's going to take some political skill. I think there is a tradition of demonstrations in Greece, but precisely because it's a tradition, it doesn't mean that it's the same thing as similar demonstrations taking place in other countries. I think we should not overstate their effect, and I think the government and the politicians have the ability to handle them. It's going to take skill, as I said, but I don't think that the likely or the only outcome is going to be tremendous instability at the end of the road.
Okay. My thanks to all five of you for joining us for this discussion today. Desmond Lockman from the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., Stathis Kalyvas at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. Good to both of you to join us on the line tonight from points beyond in the United States. Theodore Tolias from the Schulich School of Business, Sakis Gikas from the York University, the historian there, Eric Margolis from the Toronto Sun. My thanks to you three as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.